Peace and love. Peace and love, family. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. This these are our content. What I'm saying, everybody telling is coming back, all this other stuff, and plus we know that's a trick. Um, these outcomes are made by enemies, deluge, as some folks like to call them, and they got a lot of our folks thinking that they from a place that they not from. They got a lot of folks thinking that they're a certain religion that they not. They got folks doing religion. They that usually what the you need to understand, but folks is through this.
We'll discuss the aliens that we deal with on a daily basis and how they affect our lives. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the archons. This is a depiction of the archons. These are artificial intelligent beings. All right. They were created by Demiurge. One of the demiurges they were created by, because there were many demiurges that were created throughout time. They were or controllers of the material realm. All right. They use mental to this is a depiction of the they're parasitic in nature. They feed on fear, deception.
That's what I want to point out. And that lies a simple. Oh, what? I think it's okay. They get mad if they want. I don't care. All right. And yeah, they and check our people. Doesn't make any sense. All right, so they're pushing the lies.
One that starts long before slavery.
Okay, man. And they pushing the lies. They pushing the lies. Our people. And the lie that they told, one of the biggest lies they told, is what they told y'all, where they want to think y'all from. So we have a lady here, a queen and all. I know she's over me. I'm pretty sure she's older than 95% of people that watch these videos. And I'm letting somebody what she's been noticing, the folks are going around saying a lot of stuff, and she was so disturbed by it that she had to come up here, and you don't see her doing lives like that, but she come up here and she decided to tell all of our people who you are or where you from. And she's telling you at the individual to stop claiming that nonsense that they taught you in those books. The Africans want to say you from a place, right? Everybody tell you to go back somewhere, but that's for a reason. You got to understand the trick behind the archons and what they did. Now, all their people, the people they made, even the ones that don't want to do it no more, they start to jump on our side, or they are jumping on our side because they don't want to do it those archons anymore, are still trying to push the same lie of where you from. They say things like, "Oh yeah, if you don't want to come here, you be running to get out of America." But America is Atlantis. See, it's the Atlanteans against the it's the Atlanteans who are the primordial beings. You have to understand this. Who and you have the draconian, reptilian, Anunnaki race that is against us. Who they keep saying is coming back because they want to try to put the Anunnaki back in charge. They want to try to put you under their thumb. And a lot of folks are somebody coming to save us. No, that's the trick. You have to realize that we are the saviors. It's the real saviors, the Atlanteans, against the Anunnaki fallen demons. A lot of you guys are calling us Anunnaki, and that's not what let's let her tell you.
Welcome everyone, History and Genealogy, and this is ACT, We Know Better 622. Please tune in. Please like, subscribe, share, comment. We're very open to positive comments, to constructive comments, but I want to do a disclaimer and state that what I am speaking on is the research that I've done over 30 years. It's more than 30 years, but I give it 30. And what I have been able to, even before DNA, to prove about my ancestors who were Revolutionary War ancestors, who were native people or indigenous people to these lands. Some of my ancestors, very few of my ancestors came here from Africa. I have one great-great-grandmother on my mother's grandfather's side.
And the reason why one of her ancestors came from Africa is because a lot of us migrated to Africa and ended up coming back home. Not by force and not by no slave ship. They had rowboats. You're not going to fit 1,000 folks on rowboats. Furthermore, even if they had the boats, which they didn't, the records show that there was no boats like that size around. But if they had rowboats, which we all know, the facts show that they didn't, you could not fit folks on it like a bunch of sardines. They would die. Furthermore, you could not take a boat, even now, straight from Africa to here, even with all technology, the boats they have now, because therefore your ship would end up being destroyed because the way of the tide. You would never get land. That's why when you travel on a boat, you got to travel in a circle, go from one land to that mass to the next. That's why it takes so long. Also, the reefs are very dangerous. They don't talk about that, but you hear about that in all the books. So that's the reason why that happened. But when they tell you came from Africa, this woman who's older than all of us is telling you that she's done research, because she already knew, but she's done research to prove to everybody that she ain't from Africa and that y'all ain't from Africa. But yet everybody keep pushing Africa. Everybody keep telling you go someplace when you already home. You are exiled in your own land. This is Atlantis, and it's Atlanteans against the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are the fallen. You got to be careful. Anunnaki is a wide range of things, which is all our enemies. And the Anunnaki, including some of the Anunnaki's co-partners, made the archons, the grays, and all these other things to be what? Things that can attach themselves to you, I said, energy rise, so they can feed off the energy, sift you like wheat, like the Bible says.
Who was brought here in 1830 at the age of 12 from Guinea. Do you know that legal in 1830 African slaves to be sold here in the United States? So he was taken along with other children from the village, Bermuda, to see before being a slave. So that this is, this is my history. This is what I'm sharing. I share about my Mohawk ancestors. I share about my
Mohawk Indians were Atlanteans. That's Mr. T's lineage, if you don't know about it.
Algonquin ancestors, my Siouan ancestors. I speak on, even on those Europeans who I am blood connected to. And they came into my lines through various means. But today I want to talk about my paternal grandfather and his lines. His name, Grandpa Baxter. We called him Grandpa Baxter, Charles Wesley Baxter. And the reason is that when my brother went to do our paternal DNA test, it came back 100% Native American from Colombia, South America. And my grandfather and his people, as far as we knew, were slaves in South Carolina, not far from Columbia, South Carolina, by the way. So they were slaves. And we did not, my brother actually took an African ancestry test, to see what parts of Africa our ancestors came from. And it came back 100% Native American. He gets a certificate of indigenous ancestry. And in fact, when I took my maternal line DNA test with African ancestry, they traced those lines back to Spain. So they gave me a certificate of 100% European because Spain. But they did not clarify that the Moors were in Spain, that Spain, which was populated by Africans who came over from North Africa, over the Iberian Peninsula into what is now Spain. It probably, I don't know what they called it back there, 20, 30,000, maybe 40 or 50,000 years ago when my female ancestor.
So every time she looked, no matter how she looked and all the research she's done, it says that she's from America. Her bloodline is from America. It's not from Africa. And when she did find only one relatives that moved from Africa to America, right? They actually moved. They wasn't slaves when they moved, but they moving back to America due to whatever was going on in Africa. All right. So we need to stop calling ourselves Africans and saying from Africa, because clearly, if our older generation, she's got to be at least close to 80-something, 90 years old, and she's saying, "Y'all, I did my research. I already knew it, but we not from Africa." And she explained that the only one relative that I did have, he ended up coming back to America. In other words, she's saying back because originally he was from America. So they keep telling you from Africa, and you got these groups saying Africa and all this stuff, but no, that's wrong. We got to stop. We got to get rid of Africa, get rid of the word African American, get rid of the word black. We got to stop using these misnomers that take away your rights. All right, start calling who you are. We are Atlanteans. If you really want to use a word down here, you can say the Tartarian Empire because we rule on this side and they use that side. If you want to go further than that, there's another word you can use as well. Morocco Empire, you can say that too, but really you're talking Tartarian, you're talking Atlantis. Let's go back some. All right. Now, they lied about the history and told you that you were slaves. No. A lot of people don't realize that the white folks, when they came here, ended up working for us. And we didn't treat them cruelly. That's called a job. They called it slave ship when they turned around and did stuff to us. You see, we didn't beat them or nothing. We gave them land and money. We gave them a job that would get back on their feet because they moved from a land they was exiled from because they were being bad, and we gave them a chance. And they turned around and took the knife and stabbed us in our back after it was so good for them. And then they stole all our land and then our country. Okay?
Story. One that starts long before slavery. From ancient tribal leaders to black towns that predate the colonies, every image is proof they were here first. America's original people. Can the truth has been buried? Until now. Photo 10. The Washita Nation Gathering. The black and white photo is faded at the edges, but the faces are clear. Proud, dark-skinned men and women standing in full regalia.
These are all black people. All right, let's get further down into it. So we can get now, because I just want you to see black people. We was all here. Look at this. Black Indian. He's a black man.
Designed to sever their legal claims to millions of acres and erase the fact that black people were here before the ships of the transatlantic slave trade ever arrived. Every detail in this photo, from the defiance in their eyes to the symbols sewn into their clothing, is a silent testimony. We were always here. We didn't just arrive. We belong. Photo 9. The Gullah Warriors. Captured in the early 1900s, this rare photograph shows a group of Gullah men standing along the South Carolina coast, their fishing nets slung over their shoulders like battle flags. Their skin is deep brown, their faces set with the calm strength of people who have endured centuries without surrender. Though many historians frame the Gullah as descendants of enslaved Africans, this image, and the oral histories behind it, tell a far older story. The Gullah's language, food, and architecture carry undeniable African roots, but their connection to the land runs deeper than the plantations. Even under Jim Crow, they spoke their own Creole tongue, planted their own heirloom crops, and held on to ceremonies that fused African spiritual practices with the coastal rhythms of their Carolina homeland. Looking at this photograph, you see no trace of defeat. You see men who belong to this soil as much as the tide itself, living proof that black presence in America is not just a story of bondage, but one of origin. Photo 8. The Black Seminole Defenders. Taken in the late 19th century, this weathered photograph shows a group of armed black Seminoles standing at the edge of the Florida Everglades. Their rifles rest casually in their hands, but their posture radiates defiance. Each man wears a mix of Seminole beadwork, Spanish-influenced sashes, and well-worn boots, a visual reminder of centuries of blended cultures. These men were not just warriors, they were freedom's front line. Many descended from Africans who escaped slavery in the southern states and found refuge among the Seminole people, forming an unbreakable alliance. Together, they fought U.S. military forces in the Seminole Wars, resisting forced relocation and refusing to be driven from their land. Oral histories suggest that some of their African ancestors were already in Florida before Spanish colonization, trading and living alongside indigenous groups. The U.S. government feared them because they represented a living contradiction. Black men, armed and organized, who could not be neatly categorized as slave or free. Their knowledge of the swamps allowed them to vanish when pursued, striking from the shadows in a form of guerrilla warfare that baffled the army. This photo captures them not as relic, as a warning, proof that black presence in America is not a byproduct of slavery alone, but a story of survival, alliance, and sovereignty. Every bead, rifle, and stare into the camera dares history to tell the truth. Photo 7. The Gullah Geechee Rice Kings. This rare early 1900s image shows a proud Gullah Geechee family standing ankle-deep in a South Carolina rice field, tools in hand, eyes steady on the photographer. The men wear rolled-up trousers and weathered hats, the women colorful head wraps that echo West African styles. Behind them, the shimmering rows of rice stalks stretch toward the horizon. The Gullah Geechee are direct descendants of Africans. Even after emancipation, the Gullah Geechee retained land along the coastal islands, preserving traditions, language, and cuisine that link directly back to Africa. Some historians note that their isolated communities kept cultural practices far older than the plantations, evidence of an African presence in the Americas predating Columbus. In this photo, their posture is unbroken. The land that once enslaved them is the same land they mastered, transformed, and Every stalk of rice in that field is a monument to Black ingenuity and survival, and a silent rebuke to the erasure of their history. Photo 6. Black Seminole Scouts. This haunting late 1800s photograph captures.
So look, when we fought these wars, we were not in bondage. But they were getting mad because their whole goal was they want to take over the land. The fact that we were still free when they wanted us not to be free, after we gave them jobs and gave them land, and they wanted us to be in bondage. But they could not make us in bondage on our own land. In fact, we helped fight wars, and then we fought U.S. government on top of that. And they would despise the fact that Black men, with all these lovely pictures going out of how strong we were, how strong our people were, it made them look bad, and it discouraged their soldiers. So they set out to not only get rid of all the pictures and stuff after they tricked us and stole the land, right? So that we would never remember how great we were, how great we are. All right, we would not remember that. Even without our abilities, we were still whooping their ass.
Freeding and their land. The government's fear of these united Black and Native fighters was so deep that they became one of the most targeted groups in American history. By the time of this photograph, the Black Seminoles had been exiled to Mexico and later recruited by the U.S. Army as scouts, tracking raiding parties across the Texas-Mexico border. Ironically,
so after they say they come beat you, and they pretty much, oh, well, just join us then. We need you to help us raid these other people who wasn't Black. And these guys are trying to take us over. And if they take us over, they're going to take your land next, right? Ain't that what they say? But you're next. Everybody say you're next. We're not listening to that no more. We fell for it once. That's how we got here. You're next trick.
our channel.
Thinking everybody wanted to help us trick. Thinking everybody was cool, good like us trick when they wasn't. Because everything they wanted to do was a trick to get us in bondage.
As this goes a long way to reclaiming our history. Photo 5. The branded forehead. The image is haunting. A Black man stares into the camera, his forehead permanently scarred with his owner's initials, carved into his flesh with hot iron. Around his neck sits a heavy iron collar, its sharp points designed to cause pain and prevent rest. On the surface, it's a photo of slavery's cruelty. But when you look deeper, it's also a clue to a buried truth, that many of these so-called African slaves were actually America's first people. Branding was not only a way to mark ownership, it was a tool of identity erasure. Before Europeans, the Americas were already home to thriving Black indigenous nations, the Yamasee, Washita, Black Seminoles, and more. Many members of these tribes were later classified as Negro through paper genocide, stripped of their native titles, and forced into the slave system. A branded forehead like this could just as easily belong to a native Black American whose ancestors had lived on this land for centuries before Columbus. The collar in this image isn't just a restraint, it's a metaphor for how history chained these people to a false narrative. Government records would list them as African, ignoring that their languages, burial mounds, and oral traditions tied them to this continent long before ships arrived from West Africa. This man's face is a victim of slavery. It's living proof of an erased identity. In his scar, you see two histories at war, one that insists Black people arrived here, and one that remembers they were already home. The iron burned his skin, but the truth survives in the bloodlines he carried forward, bloodlines that link directly to America's first civilizations. Photo 4. Civil War soldier and his Black comrade. In this 1860s photograph, a white Confederate soldier stands proudly beside a Black man, his so-called servant. The official record labels him as a slave, but history rarely admits that many of these Black men were not African immigrants. Many were native Black Americans, the descendants of the continent's earliest people, caught in the machinery of the Civil War. Before the war, countless Black indigenous tribes had already lived here for millennia, but by the 1800s, government policies like the Indian Removal Act and paper reclassification stripped them of their native status, labeling them Negro, and funneling them into slavery. This photograph could easily depict a Yamasee, Washita, or Black Seminole man forced into service for the very armies that sought to erase his people from the land. The irony runs deep. A native son of America, fighting in a war that would decide the fate of a country his ancestors helped build. Yet in the official narrative, he was just another slave. The war became another stage where the first people of this land were made invisible, their indigenous roots overwritten by a story that began with ships instead of centuries of civilization. Photo 3. Jonathan Walker, the Branded Hand. In 1844, abolitionist Jonathan Walker was caught helping 7 enslaved black people escape to freedom. For this, U.S. authorities branded the letters SS, meaning slave stealer, into his palm. Most history books frame this as a story of white allyship, but rarely do they reveal who those enslaved people truly were. Many were native black Americans, the first people of this land. Tribal identities had been erased through forced reclassification. By the 1840s, America's indigenous black nations, from the Washita to the Yamasee, had already been stripped of their lands, their languages suppressed, and their ancestry rebranded as African, regardless of origin. When Walker helped them escape, he wasn't just freeing slaves. He was rescuing survivors of the oldest civilizations on the continent. The branding of Walker's hand became a national symbol of abolition, yet the deeper crime, the erasure of native black heritage, remained buried. This single act of punishment symbolized more than the hatred of a man who defied slavery. It symbolized the state's determination to protect a false origin story for Black America. This photograph of Walker's scarred palm is more than a relic of abolitionist history. It's a quiet, enduring testimony to the native Black Americans whose fight for freedom began long before 1619 and whose legacy America still tries to hide. Photo 2 is one of the most busy shows Gordon, an escaped man with deep keloid scars across his back from years of brutal whipping. It became one of the most widely circulated photographs of the Civil War, used by abolitionists to expose the horrors of slavery. But there's a piece of this story that rarely gets told. Gordon's ancestry was tied to native black tribes of the Deep South. Before he was enslaved on a Louisiana plantation, Gordon's people had been free agriculturalists, fishermen, and traders along the Mississippi River for generations. They were part of an indigenous black community whose land and culture were consumed by the expansion of the slave economy. Once reclassified as Negro under America's racial laws, their original identity was erased, making them easier to exploit. When Gordon escaped and showed his back to Union Army photographers, it wasn't just a body bearing the marks of slavery. It was the body of an original American, a descendant of the first people here, forced to live under a system that pretended he was a foreigner to his own homeland. This image doesn't just speak to cruelty. It speaks to historical theft of land, of names, and of the truth about who the first Americans really were. Photo 1. Freedmen in the Old South, 1865. This rare photograph, taken just after the Civil War, shows a group of newly freed black men, women, and children standing in front of crude wooden cabins. To most, it looks like the start of freedom, but to those who know the deeper story, it's also visual proof that these people were not brought here. They were already here, long before the first slave ships ever arrived. The elders in the photo came from families.
Bottom line, now that you know, hope a lot of other folks see this video, there should be nobody calling themselves African American. Peace and love, family. Nobody saying they from Africa or anything like that. Yeah, the elderly lady tell you we ain't from there. She done the research. All right? And you got documentaries from white people telling you that you is not from Africa, you from America. Peace and love.